Scotland has some amazing woodlands and forests, and they are brilliant. I mean, just look at this. Now, Scotland is incredibly lucky. It's got lots of what we refer to as native woodland. Scotland's native woodlands are simply defined as those where over half of the dominant tree species are naturally occurring and haven't been introduced by man. Now, let's be clear about this. There's no such thing as a truly natural woodland anywhere in the UK, even in Scotland. In fact, because Scotland's been inhabited for so long, almost every aspect of the landscape has been touched by a human hand. Which means, to a greater or lesser extent, Scotland's woodlands can be described as semi-natural. But these native woodlands are incredibly special and full of surprises. Now, if you think of a native woodland here in Scotland, the chances are it's made up of these. Now, this here is a Scots pine. It is our only native conifer tree, and this is a rather fine example, it has to be said. But there are more to Scottish native woodlands than just pine. In fact, a whole variety of trees will often grow together depending on the environmental conditions. And these different kinds of native forests can be split into 6 different types. The 6 types of native woodland are lowland mixed deciduous woodlands, upland mixed ashwoods, upland oakwoods, upland birchwoods, wet woodland, and of course native pinewoods. There are scrub habitats too, such as juniper, hazel, blackthorn, even montane willow. The character of native woodland is directly influenced by the complexity of the natural environment. Now, that can be geology, altitude, rainfall and soil type. They've all got their bearing. But aspect also has a part to play, whether the wood is south or north facing, for example. So, in short, every mammal, bird, insect or plant found here in the Blackwood of Rannoch is a direct reflection of the environment here in Highland Perthshire. Native woodlands have many benefits, but to find out just how important they are, I'm going to speak to the experts. So, as Head of Environmental Policy for Forestry Commission Scotland, Gordon, I can't think of anyone better to tell me what the importance of native woodland is.
Overall, our native woods are an irreplaceable part of our natural heritage. They've been around with us a long time, and they have not just a very large proportion of our native threatened animals and plants that live here, but also they have a great value in the landscape and the scenery and the history of Scotland. They're also a great place to be in, and people increasingly are using them for recreation, cycling and walking and bird watching, all sorts of things like that. So they're great for people, they're great for the environment, and they're lovely to look at.
How old are these native woodlands?
Well, some of the woods themselves have been with us right since the last ice age, the ancient and semi-natural woods as they're called. And the trees in some of these woods can be 300 or 400 years, or they can be quite recent. So the woodland age is different from the age of the trees.
How much native woodland do we have left?
We've been doing a survey to find that out.
Why was it deemed necessary to undertake this survey in the first place?
Well, this survey was undertaken starting in 2006 to find out exactly what we have got and what state it's in, what's the ecological health of our woods as well as the area, what type of native woods have we got and where exactly are they and how fragmented. It was important to find all this out because although we had a reasonable idea, we didn't really know where best to target our resources and help people to manage these woods.
What sort of conservation work has been going on in our native woodlands, and how are you going to apply what you've learnt from this survey?
Well, we've been managing them for about 20 years or more now, as increasingly we've become aware of their importance. And in that time we've been restoring ancient woodland sites by removing the non-native species and encouraging regeneration of native species or planting them. We've been planting new native woods, so there's been a large amount of those planted, and especially in the Highlands, but also lowland areas. And We've been encouraging expansion by regeneration from woodlands, often by fencing off or controlling deer numbers. What the survey will do is enable us to target future action more effectively.
So when we talk about woodlands, Rob, we tend to think about trees, but it's much more than just that, isn't it?
Yes, I mean obviously the trees are important, but everything from the fungi and the mosses, the lower plants, the animals, the insects, all of these things come together to make a wonderful assemblage, really, a suite of species.
While we're standing here with the smell of pines in our nostrils, tell us a bit more about this particular rare and special environment.
It's dominated by the Scots pine. Scots pine have this enormous distribution. They can be found in the north of Norway and as far south as Spain. They grow in Scotland here, and they grow all the way through Siberia into eastern China. So they have a huge range. Despite being widespread, being fairly common, they are a very, very important species in Scotland, in the Scottish ecology.
So how old are these forests?
The forests themselves are very old. Scots pine, we know, has been present in the UK for about 8,000 years.
So what we see around us, this beautiful sort of open woodland structure with all this diversity of trees and this beautiful spongy understory is the essence of pine woodland.
Yes, it is really. This is a really good example of native pine forest, yes.
So Rick, this is Old Grantley Castle Woods, so you're part owner of this place. Now, this is Upland oak woodland?
That's right.
And what makes this place so special?
Well, this wood comprises mainly of pedunculate oak. It was last felled about 100 years ago at the time of the First World War, so most of these trees are about 100 years old. What strikes people most when they walk into a wood like this is the carpet of spring flowers, so the bluebells, the wood anemone, primroses and violets. We have quite a number of lichens and bryophytes and liverworts that cover the trees here. And if you go to the west of Scotland, you'll find conditions where these plants coat the trees entirely and becomes very, very lush feeling.
When I walk into a woodland like this, it's like a sense of a tropical forest. There's life piled upon life here. It's a really diverse place.
It is a rainforest. It's just in a different climatic zone, but maybe equally as important.
Well, it feels that this wood has still got a human presence. We arrived here, we see little paths disappearing through the bluebells, and there's little piles of firewood here and there. How are you working this? How are you managing this wood?
We take a certain amount of timber out of here. The best timber gets taken to a furniture workshop a few miles away, gets turned into high-class furniture, and the rest of the timber we use as firewood, and it heats 4 or 5 houses in the valley here for a good part of the year.
It sounds almost too perfect, because there are threats to an environment like this, isn't it? There's things you have to fight in order to maintain a woodland like this.
We fight the deer to a certain extent. Deer are a wonderful animal and very much part of the woodland, but there are so many of them, they cause problems by browsing back the seedlings and saplings and actually preventing another generation of trees growing up, or preventing bushes growing through an area of woodland like this. Another threat is rhododendron. These are bushes that can invade a woodland. They kill out all the other plant species, and eventually they take over the woodland, so as when the trees die, the trees can't replace themselves either, and you end up with just an area of rhododendron.
So is this a case for some light touch management?
Yeah, certainly. If we were managing this part of the wood for timber, you'll see we've got a good quality tree there from a timber point of view. Another quite good one here, whereas this tree is smaller, it's struggling a bit, it hasn't got enough light, it's being outcompeted by the 2 trees on each side. So we could come in, take this away for timber. We're just mimicking what naturally happens here.
So you're using the wood even though it looks pretty much untouched?
Yes, very much so.
Wet woodland is found throughout Scotland, wherever the soil is kind of poorly draining and soggy. Now, it comes in many different forms. This one here is alder-dominated wet woodland. But to find out more, here is Gordon Patterson.
Wet woodlands are found in a wide variety of situations, including along the river valleys, lower valley slopes, around bogs and mires, and also transitions from open water to drier ground. The trees are usually birch, alder and willow, all of which support a large number of insect species.
Wet woodlands bring yet more diversity, not just in terms of wildlife, but at a landscape scale as well. They're brilliant for water quality because they hold back the nutrients, but also they act as flood defences by holding back the water itself. So even though you might not like it when your boots get a good soaking, remember, wet woodlands are as important as any other kind of native woodland. Now, I love birch trees, but I particularly like birch woodland. There's something magical about the way the light bounces around within them, giving them a particular luminosity. Now, to find out more about upland birch woodlands, I spoke to Paddy Robertson from Forestry Commission Scotland. So Paddy, what exactly is an upland birch woodland?
An upland birchwood in Scotland would be dominated by one of our two birch species, up to pure stands of birch as well, so it's not always mixed in with other species.
But the upland part of the title is a bit of a misnomer, isn't it?
Yeah, it can be, because it can grow quite happily as quite a distinctive habitat, almost down to sea level.
And there's more than one species?
Two species of birch that we've got growing native in Scotland, silver and downy birch. They can hybridise at some sites as well, so distinguishing between them can be a bit of fun.
Now, birch is like an interesting tree, but a birch-dominated woodland must have some pretty special qualities. What are they?
You'll find birch woodlands can actually establish quite quickly compared to, say, an oak wood or a pine wood. It can be a pioneer species. The birch can come in quite quickly and establish a woodland within 20 or 30 years that is recognisable as an established woodland.
Does it have any real uses for mankind?
Yeah, we have plenty of uses for upland birchwood. It's very useful for grazing or even for firewood source as well, because it grows quite quickly and it can make quite good furniture as well.
So how old do these trees get?
On a good site, they can get well over 100 years old. And again, you can find in the sort of the highest altitude ranges, you can find very old trees that aren't particularly big because they've been battered by wind or snow throughout the year.
Now, you might be a bit surprised by this, but there are native woodlands close to most cities and towns. I'm talking about lowland mixed deciduous woods. These often comprise of dominant species such as oak and ash, with maybe a hazel understory. Now, that's a native woodland on your own doorstep. And given the close proximity of these woods, they provide the perfect opportunity for recreation and education. Lowland mixed deciduous woodland comes in a variety of different types, depending on the specific environment and the way it's been managed. Where they exist on steep slopes or inaccessible areas, they're more likely to have had only limited intervention.
Lowland mixed deciduous woodlands are amongst the most diverse of our native woodland types. Many of these woods have been used for thousands of years for timber and other wood products, as well as pasture and shelter for animals. Many of these woods can still produce timber for construction and furniture and also firewood.
On lime-rich soils in the uplands, we find diverse mixed woodlands in which ash, oak, hazel, wych elm, downy birch and rowan are common, known as upland mixed ashwoods. Ash is a glorious tree. It's often found in small groups growing on fertile, moist, deep and freely draining slopes, up gullies near rivers and streams, on the lower edges of oak woods and as individual trees on field boundaries. With its characteristic black buds and upward pointing branches, it produces good timber and great firewood. Unfortunately, it's in big trouble, threatened by a particularly nasty disease called Chillara or ash dieback. Now, this is a fungus and it's spread primarily by wind-borne spores or diseased planting stock. This disease has been particularly devastating on the continent, where it's spread through 22 different countries since it was first discovered in Poland and Lithuania back in the early 1990s. And with widespread infection, dieback and subsequent mortality, Paddy Robertson explains what we're doing about it.
We have areas that we're looking to remove all infected ash planting, so that's to mitigate against the effects of imported trees that have carried the disease that we've actually been planted in the landscape over the last 3 or 4 years. We're trying to get as much of that as possible removed as quickly as we can. We're also trying to remove infected trees in a buffer area to try and prevent that being a stepping stone across which the disease is getting to the west coast. It's very important that we do that because ash is a very significant species in terms of the biodiversity it supports.
In this programme, we've really learnt about the significance of native tree species and their value to almost all aspects of life here in Scotland. Not only do they support a huge array of other species, some of which are found nowhere else in the UK and are truly iconic of Scotland itself, but they're good for the economy, for our heritage, and for simply the sheer pleasure that they bring us. I mean, look at the grandeur they add to this landscape. And by speaking to the experts, I've got a real understanding of the fact that the Forestry Commission has not only got to grips with the true extent of native woodland cover here in Scotland, but also the health of these woodlands and the threats. And by addressing these threats and applying this new understanding, these forests will be with us for many generations to come.